So Ayato is coming out pretty soon, coming out in the next patch, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering where he's at, how he's looking currently, and probably more importantly, whether or not you should pull for the Jade Cutter because he is a sword character before the Yaimiko banner ends. So hopefully I get this video out by then so that you guys can make a decision. So we're going to be talking about that. And we're also just going to be talking about a bunch of other Ayato things like buffs he's gotten, and a general idea on what his kit does without going into too much specifics so that I don't get copyright striked by Hoyoverse. Anyway guys, my name is Crypt13. Welcome to the channel. Let's talk Ayato. Okay, so let's first talk about his E skill. His E skill is an infusion, so it's very similar to both Child's E skill, and it's also very similar to Hu Tao, but obviously instead of being Pyro, it is going to be Hydro. But in addition to his E skill, he is also going to leave a taunt, which behaves very similar to all of the other taunts, so kind of like Mona, kind of like Ganyu, kind of like Amber. Our Mona does do periodic Hydro damage, and Ayato's just kind of sits there and then it will explode after a certain time, or if it takes a certain amount of damage, and it will deal, obviously, AoE Hydro damage. So when Ayato is transformed and he gets his Hydro infusion, he can no longer use his charge attacks and plunging attacks, and he can only use normal attacks. The animation for it looks the same, so there's not much variety. He's always just gonna do one single slash, kind of like this, every time. However, it is broken out into a 3-hit combo, so the first one does different scaling from the second one and does different scaling from the third one. He also gets resistance to interruption, which is nice, but it's not a really huge deal or anything like that. And then he also has a stack system as well. The stack system just increases the damage on his normal attacks while in his E skill by a flat damage bonus. So this is very similar to the likes of Yunjin and Shenhe. This increase in damage, this flat damage increase, will scale off of his max HP. So it's not going to be as strong as Shenhe's and Yunjin's, but it's still a pretty decent buff. This stack system has kind of gone over quite a few name changes. It used to be called Wave Flash, but now it's called Namisen. Not really a huge thing, but I just kind of want to mention that. So that's kind of his E skill in a nutshell without going into too much specifics. And then let's go ahead and talk about his burst now. His burst is very similar to the likes of Ganyu.
This is long overdue.
So it's going to rain down rain droplets or bloom water blades instead of ice. And the way that it behaves, depending on how many enemies are on the field, is very similar. So it's got kind of like pseudo-targeting, and it's also AoE damage. So, if there's multiple enemies around, and if the AoE hits multiple enemies, you can get, a lot of extra damage from this. However, there is an extra effect, very similar to Ganyu. Ganyu gives an extra 20% cryo damage if you stand inside of the field. However, with Ayato, you're going to get a normal attack damage bonus. This did used to be an attack speed increase, but they changed it to just normal attack damage bonus. I will mention this now because a lot of people are complaining this, but it is a high cost burst. 80. So that means it's going to cost a lot of energy, and it has that long 20-second cooldown. Compared to Ganyu's, who's 60, and, it provides a lot of benefits. So that's a direct comparison that I'm sure a lot of people are going to make and most likely complain about. His burst is too high cost, and the utility is just similar to Ganyu's, so why does it have to be an 80 cost burst? But, it is what it is, and we just kind of have to deal with it. Now let's talk about his passive. His passive skill relates to his Wave Flash stacks, or no longer his Wave Flash stacks, his Namisen stacks, and it just helps him get more. There's not really too much detail we can get into here. It just helps him get more stacks easily so that he can do his maximum damage quicker. His passive too has changed. It used to be a burst damage increase that was based on his HP. It used to be 3% of his HP, so since now that's gone, I'm sure, hopefully I don't get copyright strike for saying that, but it used to be 3% of his HP, and that would have been flat damage bonus on every single bloom water blade that hit an enemy. So this has now changed to energy regeneration. So when Ayato is off of the field and he has less than 40 energy, then he will auto regen 1.5 energy every second. So this is kind of their way of pseudo making his energy less than 80 by giving him a passive skill that boosts his energy regeneration. But for some reason, MiHoYo has just been very allergic to just lowering elemental burst costs to below 80. Not sure why they're going this route. You know, instead they could give him a better or more useful passive skill and just lower his burst cost. Since the extra damage based off of HP was removed, the scaling on this attack was also slightly increased. Ayato also received some base attack stat buffs. His HP was slightly buffed and his attack was slightly buffed, and then his defense was slightly nerfed. It's nothing huge, just a couple of points, but it does slightly affect his damage. Okay, now the section that I'm sure a lot of you guys were waiting for, whether or not you guys should pull for the Jade Cutter. How does it compare to his signature weapon? So I don't have the Jade Cutter, so just, you know, kind of pretend that I'm showing it on the screen. But if we were to compare the Jade Cutter to his signature weapon, their elemental burst damage is almost identical. I'm talking like 1% damage difference. Very, very close between the two weapons. But when it comes to normal attacks, depending on the artifact set that you run, it can range from a 16% to a 22% damage difference in favor of his signature weapon. This is for normal attack damage, and since Ayato is probably going to be very much focused on normal attack damage during his E skill, this means that his signature weapon is better than the Jade Cutter. Jade Cutter is still good, but his signature weapon is definitely better. And then when you compare Jade Cutter to other 4-star options, things like the Black Sword and the Black Cliff Sword, the damage difference we're talking about here is somewhere within the ballpark of 5 and 7% damage difference in favor of the Jade Cutter. However, when it comes to elemental burst damage, that gap grows quite a bit, and then it starts ranging from 15 to 18%. And then, you know, I want to quickly mention his constellations next. His constellations look pretty good so far. Most, if not all of them, are buffs to his damage, so that's pretty good. He also has some attack speed increases with his constellations, and his C6 will increase the potency of his elemental skill. The early ones are all increases to damage, however, the first one is a conditional because it's only going to work if the opponents have 50% or less HP. Let me quickly go back to his signature weapon, because his signature weapon is a really cool one, and it's actually going to buff a couple of other sword characters that we currently have in the game that aren't typically used as main DPS. Well, at least not used by a majority of the people that play this game. So really quickly, his signature weapon will give you a full, just flat elemental damage bonus, and then when your teammates use elemental skills, you will gain more normal attack damage bonus. And so what this means is that characters that have an elemental infusion on their normal attacks will like this weapon a lot. So this theoretically means that a character like a C6 Bennett, if you want to use him as a main DPS, will actually really like this new signature weapon. He will get quite a big buff. As well as our boy Kaya, and if you run him with Chongyun, so that you can infuse his normal attacks with Cryo. So main DPS, Kaya mains, you might want to get this weapon. It's looking kind of nice. His signature weapon was also changed. It used to be normal attacks, but now it's changed to elemental skills, which in my opinion is way better, because when typically you do your rotation, you don't really do normal attacks. You just kind of pop your E skills and then you're good. So if it was normal attacks, your rotation would have been slowed down a bit, because basically what you'd have to do is switch into your character, throw out a normal attack, use your E skill, use your burst, throw out a normal attack, and then go ahead and continue your rotation. So basically you just have to interrupt your skills and bursts with normal attacks, which kind of disrupts your flow a little bit. So I'm glad that they made that change. Okay, now what about compared to other characters currently in the game? So compared to other characters, and I'm just talking solo damage, no support from any other characters, Ayato's damage is in a solid spot. Compared to Hu Tao, compared to Ito, compared to Yai's E, compared to Yoimiya's E, compared to Ganyu's charge attack, he does pretty decent damage. Versus Hu Tao, they're kind of on the same level. Versus Ganyu still wins, but it's not like a super gigantic margin. Also considering that Ayato does his damage a lot quicker. he does it in 6 seconds. This means that Ganyu will probably only able to get out 3 charge attacks during Ayato's full rotation. Hu Tao's, for example, right, is 9 seconds versus Ayato's 6 seconds. Ito does a whole lot of damage, but his damage is over 11 seconds, so almost double the amount of time. And then when compared to Yai's E skill, Ayato was doing a little bit less damage, but again, over 6 seconds versus Yai's 15 seconds, 15 to 13, however long you keep those totems up. So Ayato does a lot of good damage in very little time, 6 seconds, which I think can be both a blessing and a curse, because that means that Ayato's field time is not as long as other characters, but this could mean that getting buffs on your Ayato might be a little bit harder because his rotation is so quick. Not sure exactly how that's going to play out, but just something to kind of think about. And actually, the last thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm sure that this comparison is going to be made by a lot of people, is what kind of value will Ayato bring that Child doesn't bring? Because they fill very similar roles, normal attacking Hydro character. Obviously, that's a very huge, broad, sweeping assumption and generalization of these characters, because although they're very similar, they're also very, very different from each other. But from a very broad perspective, both of these characters are doing very similar things. And so I'm pretty sure as we get closer and closer to Ayato's release date, a lot of people are going to make direct comparisons between these two characters and probably telling you that if you have Child, you probably don't need Ayato, or if it turns out that Ayato is not as good, that you should just go for Child. I think this is going to be inevitable, but honestly, right? People play Genshin Impact because they like the characters, and because pretty much every character in this game can clear all of the content, 36 starring the Abyss included. It might take a little bit more effort, but it's doable. So anyway, those are kind of all of the thoughts that I have right now on Ayato. I'm sure that that's going to change as time goes on. So definitely, guys, leave a comment down below on how you guys think Ayato is currently looking, if you know more details, and also what you thought about what I think. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, drop a like down below, and maybe even consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, I will see you guys later.